Hey, what's going on, everyone? We're back for another episode of the Pair Program. I'm your host, Tim Winkler, accompanied by my co-host, Mike Gruen. Mike, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's Friday. Can't complain. Excited for today's episode. We're going to be covering this topic of building in stealth mode. Interesting topic. It's a very unique way of starting up a startup, and some of the things we'll cover will define what it means to build in stealth. We'll discuss some of the benefits and the downside of growing in this way, and explore the different ways to transition out of stealth mode. So we've got some excellent guests who are well versed with this topic. Mike and Roselle, thank you all for spending some time with us today.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Good stuff. All right. Yep. So before we dive into the discussion, as you all are all aware, we like to kick things off with a fun segment that we call Pair Me Up.
Pair me up.
There it is. This is a segment where we all kind of go around the room and we call out some complimentary pairings. I always like to start with Mike Gruen, my co-host. What's on your agenda today to be paired up with?
So, my pairing is cold, like rainy days and pho. Like, I don't know, they just go together for me. Like when it's a little chilly, doesn't and dark outside, going for some pho. Just, I don't know. It's just it's like a pho day. That's sort of my thing.
I dig that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's also great for hangovers as well.
Yes. And also I love that so many pho restaurants have fun names like Real, which is the place that I go to. Shout out. Or the one that my sons and I want to start at the beach someday for sure. So
but sure.
That is good.
I like it. Good stuff. Yeah, I'll jump in next. So I'm going to go with startups and skiing. And this is something that kind of came to my mind. Went on a ski trip recently out in Utah and met up with a few entrepreneurs, startup founders, some folks out of the VC space in Austin. And while we were out there, we ended up meeting up with another group of startup founders. And these were folks that are coming from like SF and Boulder. And at one point, I think we had a group of around 20 folks who were all kind of in the startup ecosystem, and we're all kind of skiing, snowboarding, just kind of getting together out on the mountain. And I don't know, it kind of dawned on me that, there's a good amount of folks that I know in startup communities that I meet with, a lot of techies as well, that surround themselves with this sport. And I don't know if it's maybe just some similarities from a personality perspective, like, they're, I don't know, risk takers or the thrill. But I've seen a lot of folks that are in the startup ecosystem kind of surround themselves with this sport of skiing. So I don't know. I was curious if any of you all, do you ski, snowboard? Any of you will partake?
Man, I tried downhill skiing once about 20 years ago. Oh, no, it wasn't downhill skiing. It was snowboarding. And I spent the whole day falling or getting up from falling. While the little 5-year-old went zipping around.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You're not alone on that, though.
I love snowboarding. I love how they usually have a nice way to get a beverage at the top of the mountain. I like how there's a place to get a beverage at the bottom of the mountain. I can celebrate the entire experience.
Right. Yeah. It gets a little dangerous after you've done that routine about 5 times. And you're like, maybe it's time to get off the mountain.
I agree.
Well, cool. I'll pass it over to you, Roselle. Why don't you give our listeners a brief intro and tell us what your pairing is?
Yeah, sure. So Roselle Safran, the CEO and founder of KeyCaliber. KeyCaliber is a company that allows organizations to identify their critical assets automatically. And so pairings, one that I was thinking of was a day at the beach and then an evening eating outside, outdoor dining in the evening. Because, if you're at the beach, you're someplace where the weather is lovely. And so then going for a dinner at a place where you're outdoors when the temperatures have cooled off, and it's just lovely.
But I like that. Definitely agree.
I have kind of a bias for wanting to be in the Caribbean, so that might have something to do with that pairing.
And then you go in seafood restaurant for the most part. I feel like that's
actually no. I'm quasi-vegetarian, so
Okay.
not necessarily seafood restaurant, but someplace with something fresh and and just a nice outdoor atmosphere.
Outdoor atmosphere. Yeah. Good call. Cool. Mike Hands, what have you got for your your intro and your pairing?
Yeah. So Mike Hands, VP of Engineering at Picnic. We solve the problem social engineering at scale. I could jump into that later because I could probably talk about that for 20 minutes. But I have kind of a controversial one. Tim, I know you've kind of broached this before, but being from Pittsburgh, there's a lot of ketchup, there's a lot of pickles talk. Nobody puts eggs and ketchup together. I love it. I grew up with them apart. I think they are delicious together. I don't know if they would run me out of town, but I subscribe to it. And, even in my own household, a couple kids like it. Some think it's disgusting, but I think it's perfect. And I'm willing to stand by it.
I'm more of a salsa and eggs. Like I love like a nice spicy salsa and eggs. I haven't ventured into ketchup, but I mean, it's tomato based. I can see it.
I like mustard and eggs.
What?
Oh, you're a monster.
I've never heard mustard and eggs.
I'm willing to try it. I'm going to try it this weekend and kind of report back, but
I'd be willing to do it because I like in my egg salad, I'll put a little mustard in the egg
cool.
salad.
Yeah.
So I can totally relate. I got it.
I like your style, Mike. I got shamed a few episodes ago for pairing macaroni and cheese and ketchup.
That's because that's disgusting.
It's not. No, I mean, ketchup is a universal condiment. I mean, you can use it really anywhere. But yeah, ketchup and eggs. I'm a hot sauce and eggs kind of guy. But I dig it. Well, cool. All right, went around the horn. Let's transition here to the next segment. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be talking about building in stealth mode. We'll start with defining what this means. I found a few different examples online. The one that I thought that was kind of nice and to the point stated a stealth mode startup is a business attempting to bring a new product or service to market under a temporary state of secrecy. So Mike Hands, you work with a startup, Picnic, who, y'all just recently came out of stealth mode. Can you explain for our listeners, why did Picnic elect to build in stealth mode?
I think for us, it was a lot of focus, to be truthful. I think whenever you go on the web, you see people talk a lot about IP protection and things like that. But I think we had a big run on what we wanted to build. And I think it was really to just be hyper-focused. And I know just even in my past, there was always a lot of discussion around, what's X competitor doing or Y competitor. And all of a sudden you start pinning yourself to kind of like their pace when, erroneously you should just be focusing like inward on what you're building. So for Picnic, we exited, feels like a lifetime ago, maybe like 2 or 3 weeks ago, kind of getting everything out there. But I think the initial onslaught and premise there was just really building the product that we were hearing about without kind of like a lot of external forces. And that doesn't mean no feedback, but just having to keep that pace.
Mm. So how long total were you all in stealth mode?
I would say probably like 1.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And Roselle, your current company, KeyCaliber, was this stealth mode as well?
Yeah, for the first few months, we were in stealth mode as well. Yeah. So for us, we're essentially a new product category. And so we wanted to take some time to get our ducks in a row a little bit before we launched anything that was public facing related to what we were doing, just because it is so novel. And we're in cybersecurity where it's really tough to come up with something that's novel. So that made it even more special. And so we just wanted to be a little bit more established in our footing before we put it forward.
What's interesting to me about what you just said, Roselle, was I think about it very similarly, where there's not a magic quadrant. There's not like a Gartner kind of thing going for you. So you kind of have to be a little careful too as you're building to make sure you establish like what you want to be out there in the market. So it's not fuzzy when someone sees it. I think they run to a quadrant and they like look to see who's left and right of you.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah.
So I'm curious to hear like just generally, in stealth mode, I mean, what are some of these other benefits of building in stealth mode? I think you all each had your specific kind of use case, but were there things that popped up along the way that you were like, well, this is actually quite nice as well?
Well, you build up a bit of an aura of mystery when you're in stealth mode, and so that can be attractive. Certainly attractive to investors that know you, and they say, "Oh, wait, you're up to something new. Okay, I want to be the first one to hear about this." And sometimes even with customers, because they want to be the first to know about the new technology. So sometimes there are some benefits around it, just from the fact that this secretness makes it seem a little bit exclusive if someone can learn about it. And so yeah, that's another upside of it.
I like it. I was thinking also about the opportunities it gives you around getting some things like brand identity together. I know a lot of times when you're at a smaller company, you kind of evolve that, and sometimes that could be confusing to the marketplace, where you have your initial idea, and then as you're just getting more feedback, you're kind of like moving that along, and existing customers, not that they could be disillusioned, but you have to kind of remind them, you have to kind of go over top with maybe your customer success function to make sure that they know where you're going. Or sometimes when you're in stealth, you get a chance to work with somebody on an identity, probably get maybe a new web property out there that looks exactly like the message you want. A lot of excitement around doing that too. Like, I think it kind of breaks up a little bit the daily slog. Like, that there's this milestone that you're going to hit, and it's more than just like a release of the product. All these different things kind of like at once. Or at least I love our new website.
That's a good point. Yeah. Having more of a solid understanding of how you want to market it is always helpful, and the more you can minimize how much that's done publicly, the better. Yeah,
you've got kind of more control over PR. You're not at the getting hounded by maybe media firms trying to push out content about you, which is great, but oftentimes it's on your terms, right? And I think that's the bigger point. Mike Gruen, have you worked with any companies or collaborated with any companies that were in stealth mode in the past?
I've had some friends that have worked at stealth, but I've never, not specifically. I think it's interesting. I think when I think about it, that some of the challenges that come to mind, or I'm just sort of curious. I don't even want to seed the conversation. I'm curious, like, all right, we've talked about some of the like hidden like things the benefits, but I'm curious, like, what were maybe a challenge or two that you didn't think of going in that actually proved to be there?
I'm happy to rip the Band-Aid right off of hiring, which I think is near to lots of people here, but it can be hard whenever you're recruiting under the guise of stealth, because you have to sell it a little bit more. And I think everybody here is very excited about the company that they work for. They have a lot of passion for it. But from the other side, you have to make sure somebody understands there's stability there. You have to kind of explain to them the roadmap without explaining everything that's on the roadmap. Startups give you this incredible opportunity to have, I hate to use the word like all these different hats, but in reality, you might be telling somebody about like the tech stack. But then you also have to just be careful about how you kind of like weave that narrative. And I think it's a much more intimate conversation on hiring a lot of the times, where in the past you had the presence of your product to kind of sell a lot of it for you. And then you're like closing the sale. Now you're the person that's doing like the warm lead. You're the one that's kind of going through the pipeline, and you're the one that's closing too. And that's all exciting. It's more work though, being truthful.
When you're talking to a candidate, are you careful about how much of what you're like? To me, that would be the bigger, like, because I've interviewed I've talked to people that are in stealth mode, and that's always been my hesitancy, is that they don't feel as transparent with me about what it is that they're doing because they're in stealth mode. And then it's like, well, I don't know how to move forward from here. And I'm like curious if that was similar.
So, Mike, do you want to answer that first? I have lots of thoughts.
Yeah, please. No.
Well, I mean, I think it depends on how you're defining in stealth. I mean, are you defining it as it's just not public knowledge, or are you defining it as no one outside the company knows about it? Because there's a difference. And if it's the former, then you have more leeway when you're having conversations with engineers or you're having conversations with potential customers or potential investors. If you know, they understand you're in stealth. This is close hold information. You're not signing an NDA, but they understand they're not supposed to be like just blaring it from the rooftops. And then you can have a relatively open discussion with those individuals. And to me, I look at stealth as being more in that lane versus you're either inside the circle or you're outside the circle. And if you're not inside the circle, then we don't tell you anything, because then that really starts to become a hindrance.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
That makes sense. I think that is a good point. I think because when I think about it, when some of the places I have interviewed, right, that are in stealth, if I know someone, that's a completely different conversation because we've already established a level of trust and whatever, and they know whatever they tell me is it that I know that it's not public and it's not going to go much further. So that's an interesting point as well. There's sort of what level of stealth are we really talking about?
Yeah, I'm glad that you broke it down that way, because I even think of Picnic, and to us we had a web presence and people understood kind of where things were going, but as far as like product itself, like that was really the piece that you're focusing on. So as far as like nobody understanding the idea of like the attack domain and kind of like where we're going, like that's less a thing. People already know that like that is a problem. The actual product that fulfills that and kind of like moves them to the next space, that's the one that we kept the focus on internally until we were really ready to like externally push that out. So yeah, that's a real good point. It wasn't like cloak and daggers and nobody really understood what was happening there. And I don't know if I've had that experience to say like for 6 months we've been that quiet, because that's a real interesting one. From a hiring aspect, at least people could see some of the properties we had.
Yeah, we actually had to recruit for a startup that was in, I don't even know how you define that, super stealth mode, right? Where they were just going under the alias TechCo. And we had to literally tiptoe around. I mean, there was a lot of like, during the election, there was a lot of like political, ramifications if things got leaked too early. And we found it extremely challenging to the point where we couldn't perform. We couldn't deliver. And there's only so much that you can do, but when you're talking to a person and they're like, give me more, and you can't, and same way, I'd sign like NDAs and all of these things. And, we already have it challenging enough just trying to sell a startup that has all of the collateral up front. And, at least, what you're referring to, Roselle, is like, at least like your branding's already out there and you can go and check out the leadership and you can see because I think that's a big piece of it, right? They want to buy into the leadership and they want to see who's in the seat. But if you can't even see that and you can't really describe much more, it's just, it was super frustrating, and I don't think I would ever do it again in terms of trying to solve that problem. So for the companies that do that super stuff, but I would love to, maybe a follow-up episode and see, how they navigate that, because it's just, it's hard enough as it is. So just adding that extra layer of difficulty, I can't imagine how it's too effective.
And you'd have to just go only with internal people that you already know.
And even there, I remember there was somebody who came to me and they were like, I before I can even tell you this, I need you to sign this NDA. And I was like, I'm not like,
that's a turnoff.
Right. Yeah. I don't know, like maybe the idea you had is also an idea I've already had. And I don't want to like just sign something without knowing what we're going to really be talking about. And I think it's it's interesting. And I also think like the super stealth mode, like I think there's a point where it's just kind of crazy where people think that their idea is so precious. And so like it's so much of, I think, startups is execution. And so there's a level which like if your idea is that easily like ripped off, like you should maybe reconsider it.
Absolutely.
There's definitely a range there, but yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's 90% up execution.
Right.
And so, you need to have a good idea to get to that other 90%. But yeah, if what you have can easily be replicated because of a conversation, then your IP is not that solid. So, yeah.
Exactly.
So when you're, I guess when you're at different stages of the startup's evolution, it kind of dictates, I guess, how stealthy you're going to be. So I think one of the setbacks that I've heard from is, or maybe like one of these myths around it is like, how do you truly find product market fit, or collect feedback on your product from your target audience if you're not able to really be as transparent in public? Was that ever an issue, or is that something that came up as you all were building out your products?
So I'm a very firm believer that you do not build in a vacuum, because you are not going to hit the mark. No matter how well you know the space, it's just still one person's opinion. And so the way I see it is you can't have a successful tech company without having lots of continuous feedback from that potential customer base. And so even if you're in the deepest of stealth, you still need to talk to the people that are going to use the product. I mean, that's my take on it.
I think my take's pretty similar. And especially when I talk with candidates, I think a question that comes up that in the past got misinterpreted was, you're in stealth, are you going to have customers in the future? And the answer is, well, with customers now, like you have to get that feedback early on. Like you could spend that time building, but you have to have somebody. And some of them early on are going to be more flexible. And when you're out of stealth in a product space, you might just be selling what's on the truck. But, in both cases, you have to be getting some feedback and like formulating roadmap and things. So I think anybody that's solely building in a vacuum and thinking of if you build it, they will come, like it's kind of a mistake. And I wouldn't mix like the stealth and the build parts together, to Roselle's point. Sure.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think there's an advantage with the with stealth. Like I think back to one of the very first companies I worked at where we had two solid customers that were like really invested in us as partners to help guide the product that we were building, for two different use cases. Both of them were like the dream partners in that they understood they weren't the only customer, they weren't the only people, and that sometimes their feature requests were like insane. And like, but could you please but the advantage of us having this relationship is like, but could you please build this for us anyway? We know that it's a one-off, and like you have that conversation. And I think that there's probably some advantage in being in stealth mode because you get to pick your customers a little bit more than say when you're out there and suddenly like, I'll never forget when Disney came knocking and all of a sudden like we're like, oh shit, like we're probably going to have to do this because it's Disney. In the end, we didn't because it was going to be more expensive, but than the contract was worth. But we won't get into that. But yeah, I think that there's probably some advantages from that perspective. Is that the case? I just don't know because I've never actually worked in a stealth.
I think whether you're stealth or not,
I think that you're probably always having those conversations, just like you said, and there'll be some that fit, your idea, and there's going to be some that probably don't. It's, how much custom work do you want to do? Like as a product company, you're probably always going to be evaluating that. If you're maybe in stealth and more of like pro service based, I think it makes the Disney conversation harder because it's probably like big and juicy and it's Disney and Marvel. But like, yeah, I mean, you definitely have like lots of opportunities. I wouldn't close my mind to it. I think it makes it harder though, too. Like sometimes we talked about the NDAs earlier on. Like sometimes you'll even find as you're talking to, vendors, as you're looking to kind of build out, at least from like an engineering aspect. And, it can be tough to kind of get them through that, but like you need that type of feedback. So you end up kind of like making some of those things work, and like some companies like Disney, they're not going to sign your NDA.
Oh yeah.
You're going to be signing theirs.
I mean, that was the irony of that whole thing back then. I mean, this was in the 90s. It was like a very different version of Disney, but it was still Disney. I think everybody spent more money on lawyers than the actual contract value. It was like
exactly.
Pretty ridiculous.
So let's maybe talk about the transition out of stealth and what goes into that. So I was generally curious on, maybe your experiences with KeyCaliber. Is there a point here where it's like, you're doubling down on your marketing budget at this point, or putting some money towards a large press release? I guess what goes into this this transition out of stealth mode?
Yeah, I mean, we were still pretty early when we transitioned out. And this concept of a cushy marketing budget for a big splash, unfortunately, was not in the cards. And so there wasn't a tremendous amount of fanfare around it. But one of the big changes was that the team switched their LinkedIn profiles. And that's actually, that gets lots of attention in our industry because it's enterprise. So lots of potential customers, lots of investors are on LinkedIn all day long. And
lots of recruiters.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it got good interest. And then people were excited to learn more when we were out of stealth mode and at the point where we were talking about it, because we sort of built up some hype from being in stealth. And so that may have been all that there. Well, and then the website went up. And I think part of why we were in stealth was also the fact that we didn't even have a name in the really early days of it. And so we had to get that all squared away, get the domain, get the website up. So some of that was part of the movement when we said, all right, now we're presenting KeyCaliber to the world.
How many employees were you at that point?
Full time. I think we were maybe only 2 still for full time. Yeah, but we had a number of folks that were engineers working in contracting roles. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
What, Mike? What about yourself? I mean, did you all do something similar at Picnic, or how was your transition out?
Our investment was probably a little bit different than Roselle. So we had the opportunity to hire our head of marketing, Sarah, who is completely awesome. So we had a little bit of time to kind of front run what it was going to look like to exit. And she kind of quarterbacked all of that way better than I, from an engineering aspect, ever could. So, super happy about that. And, brought a lot of like little changes along, which I thought were very interesting. Some of them are fun, right? Like a new logo that really resonates with everybody and a brand identity. T-shirts and stickers, so you can tell where people stand by what their laptop looks like, whether they have all the new stickers or you have a mix of the old and the new. So fun things like that. And then the other stuff really for Picnic, right? Kind of being in the social engineering space, we're like very sensitive to outwardly what things look like, because, we have what we consider to be like prescriptive guidance for people to kind of cut that down on their own. So making sure everybody knows what it looks like to be on social media and kind of how to talk about it. So kind of neat, for new people, they kind of get this really great document that leadership has kind of thought through. For people that are already here, like they get a chance to kind of acclimate to where we're going, which, can be a little bit of a, turn up, to be truthful, right? Because you've been operating under a certain way and then all of a sudden like the page turns and we're all the same, but, like we have like this new kind of external set of forces. And then the fun one, right? Like we talk about security, and like Roselle, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this one, but new people start emailing you. People start looking for things from you, like, would you like to hire these people from, outsource things? Hey, what's your investment look like? Lots of weird social engineering attacks and things like that. So just opening the door to that brings some of those problems almost instantly to you, where in some companies, they've had them since the beginning and like you're already used to them. So.
You're like, can I go back into stealth mode? It was kind of nice back there.
Yeah.
Can I selectively filter and then say I'm in stealth mode for the ones that are trying to sell me something I don't want? Yeah.
Right.
Your LinkedIn messages grow by like 20 of everybody trying to sell you something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that happens again when you announce a round of funding.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. LinkedIn actually has a stealth mode kind of like company. That if you're building in stealth, you just kind of like tag yourself to that as your company. Have you seen that? It's like mock something, or it's I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's certainly just like a generic logo. It's like, oh, we're in stealth. Like that's who I work for.
And you're in there with like 50,000 other people, which makes it fun. It's like a real Tumblr of personalities.
Right.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's kind of an interesting community. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of value that could be had from connecting with some of those other folks. But cool. I think that's, I think it's a really interesting journey. It's definitely, against the grain. I don't think it's like what the majority are doing. And So I love hearing about that. I mean, is there anything specific that, and kind of closing and before we transition to the next segment that, I don't know, that you wanted to share or talk about that stands out in your mind from that experience that would be, either useful or entertaining for the audience?
I could throw this out there, and this is just like my personal thoughts, but having been at a couple other startups where we weren't stealth, but we weren't marketing ourselves, and like we didn't have a lot of stuff figured out. We kind of just threw it out there. I think having at least some of the forethought to talk about, like, hey, this is what it means to do all these things, was super helpful, as opposed to externally doing them. Maybe not the best because you just had too many hats on and things like that. So I often thought in the past, like, oh, not a lot of people do this. Now I realize that people are kind of doing it almost in an implicit way anyway, if you're not doing all these other things just right. So I think it's something to even just consider, whether it wasn't on your radar before, because it just gives you a little bit of opportunity to like focus and get ahead of some of those things, which you just might not know the repercussions of doing them a little bit sideways from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, there's different types of stealth mode, like we said, like super stealth, but then there's also this stealth mode that's like in company stealth mode where you're building a new product. You just haven't released it yet, or maybe some of the other departments aren't aware of it. It's just kind of in beta, and there's only a couple of departments that are tapped into it. So I something that you brought up, Mike, that I think is interesting too, is like on the recruiting side, yeah, you got to do a lot more selling. And maybe what that means is you're bringing in like the founder on the first conversation. It's not the, ending with the founder or the CEO. And, when we hire at Hatch anyways, I'm actively involved in the early stages because I think part of the reason is like, you really need to sell folks, regardless of your stealth or just an early stage startup. We're encouraging that more and more frequently now because the market's so competitive to recruit. The earlier you can get, your heavy hitting engineers involved on the sales process to lock up, these mid senior level folks that take a little bit more hand holding, almost operate like you're in stealth mode and you need to give it that extra due diligence. We're encouraging that versus like, hey, sign this NDA or here, take this coding exam, and then we'll put you through a gate that then you can maybe talk to a recruiter or something. It doesn't work in today's market.
Yeah, I'll just say one more that, it's kind of close to home, but we did a charity event at Picnic about 2 or 3 weeks ago, a polar plunge, and we had a chance to kind of wear our new gear. And just from a morale aspect, like it's great to wear all that new stuff out there because you're excited. But then the other one too, like when you talk about recruiting, it's really great to meet some people, kind of like share all of that at once. Everybody kind of sees the whole picture, like outside of work. And it's hard to do that when it's like a one-on-one type communication. Like you don't really get a lot of those group things when you're in stealth. So like that is one con that it takes a little bit to get around.
Yeah, very cool. I was there with you on that polar plunge and it was, I believe, about 15 degrees outside. So appreciate the invite. That was a lot of fun. No, it was a good cause, and definitely saw some picnic swag getting thrown around. That was neat. All right. Any other closing statements? I think we'll transition to the last segment here. Let's do it. All right. So this colorful wheel behind me, this is the community wheel for a segment that we call Round Out My Career. And it's a fun segment. We spin the community wheel. It's got topics and questions that are crowdsourced from the Hatchpad community. And these can range from anywhere from compensation to diversity to interviewing. So I'm going to go and spin the wheel and see what today's topic is. All right, leadership. Yes, we get hyped about leadership around here. All right, let me jump into my spreadsheet here and see what kind of questions we got on this one. Okay, so the question would be, how do you gain the respect and buy-in of key stakeholders? within a startup. Um,
Key stakeholders within your company or within the customer's company?
Within your company. Yeah. So, maybe it's, I don't know, somebody who's like a head of business development, or, somebody that's in a cross department that might add some value. But and any specific areas that you've experienced or that you would advocate for to help gain that respect and buy-in from other folks within the organization at a high level?
Well, I would say from the standpoint that I'm in now, I think it's important for the leadership team to first have the mindset that they don't have a monopoly on good ideas, and that a good idea can come from anybody in the organization. And you really want to encourage everyone to speak up about good ideas, because that's how the company grows the best. And if there is that openness to new ideas being put forth to leadership, then you have a clearer path to it. And you can even have, with some large organizations, they have a whole process around how you can present an idea to leadership. And for us, we're so tiny that's not necessary. But this concept of any smart idea, I want to hear about it, is something that's really important for the organization. And if there isn't a path like that, if there is a path like that, then great. Then you take that path and you can get the idea in front of people. And when you are presenting, you want to basically have a very clear and concise discussion of what it is. And keep in mind that you are going to most likely be talking to someone who's not a technologist. And so you don't want to get super in the weeds on the technical side of it, but talk more about the business outcomes and the business benefits of it.
I think the other thing on the good idea is that no one owns an idea. It's just an idea, right? So be open-minded, like present, regardless of which side of the presenting or listening side of the idea. Once it's in that shared space, right now it's our idea, and we can riff on it and we can take it to the next level. And I think it's important when leadership does like sort of talk about a good idea, that they listen to feedback on potential ways to make the idea better, rather than being defensive about like, oh, well, we thought about that, but it's not going to work or whatever. I think that's an important part as well in getting that respect and getting, collaboration and stuff on those ideas.
Yep. Yeah, agreed. And so my experience on the other side of it, when I was at the Department of Homeland Security, I was essentially an entrepreneur. And I had an idea for building some in-house technology that I knew would benefit all of the analysts within the division. And so it took a while before it got to that leadership level. I had been socializing the idea with all of the potential users for months and months and months, and having meetings with them of what it would look like and getting those conversations started. So by the time that leadership heard about it, it already had some good momentum. Mm-hmm. And so that would be my advice for if there isn't this well-worn path, then get some momentum under your belt first, and then get to the point where you can articulate it well and say, hey, I'm not the only one that has this idea and who thinks that there's value in it. All these people do as well.
That's great. Yeah, I love that idea of like, you've already done some legwork here. This isn't just something that you just whipped up. You put a lot of work into it to get buy-in from other users, and now you're trying to get that leadership to buy in. So that's a good point. How about you, Mike?
I identify with everything that was just said. So I don't know if I could give it enough thumbs up. And the other thing, just on top of what Roselle said, like for me too, I know when I'm kind of going across, peers and we talk about feedback, something I try to definitely keep in mind for myself, at least. If I'm going to offer some feedback, I'm more than willing to put in the legwork to do some of it. If it's like looking at a document, I'm definitely going to leave some thoughtful comments. Like not just going to say, I don't understand this, but I'm willing to rewrite this to look like that. Doesn't take much time, but kind of shows effort, same thing kind of the other way around, I guess, being an engineer at heart and then kind of getting a chance to be in a spot, thankfully, to kind of like lead engineers the way I think I would want to, showing people that there's no, amount of shoveling that I won't do myself, whether it's staying up late, if it's some type of real terrible script, if somebody has something that's more business important, I'm more than happy to kind of jump in. My time's not always best spent there, but if it's late at night and that's the best way to spend that time, like I will do that. So I think it's kind of extending your way out there and showing it too, right? I mean, I think it's important to voice what's happening down, up, what's kind of happening from up, down, and then, side to side. So everybody kind of understands, hey, where could Mike help me? And where is he, really willing to help me? Like he'll do anything, but it's probably not the right guy to close a sale, but he's more than happy to jump on a sales call if it's worth it. So I think those types of bonds kind of help establish a little bit of like that leadership rapport. And like all the feedback that was just discussed, that's just a part of that cycle to me.
Yeah, I love that. One thing that I've kind of picked up on within our company is, never really portraying myself as like this, big CEO, but trying to kind of like get down on everyone's level and really almost like just maybe it's being vulnerable or just kind of being really transparent and letting folks in, because I like to same as you mentioned, Roselle, I like to get folks' ideas, and sometimes if you become like this intimidator, they're going to be more shy to present something because they think it's it's going to get shut down or this is going to be embarrassing. But like I put myself out all the time that I don't I always know what I'm doing here. I'm hiring folks because I want those ideas. Like good leaders are folks that are bringing in folks to build in areas that they're not capable of, and that's one of the things that I try to do. Is and it's maybe a little bit easier when we're smaller, 20-ish employees, where everybody can still get on a Zoom and you can kind of like throw yourself out there and have more of like this like easygoing mentality, or we don't take ourselves too seriously. I think it's a big thing here, and because of that, I think it allows for folks to feel more inclined to share an idea, whereas maybe they weren't privy to it in a previous company where it was a little bit stiffer or something like that.
I think that's interesting. You said something that sort of resonated, because I had a conversation just earlier today. I have a engineering team. We're sort of splitting things up, and I'm looking for some people to take on a little bit more leadership responsibility. And I was trying to explain, like, it's not like their concern was, I don't want people to think that I'm like now above them. I'm like, you're not. You're just in a different role. Like, we all have roles to play. Like, yes, you report to me organizationally because I have years of experience, blah, blah, blah. But like in general, like we just all have our roles to play. My role is to do this and to meet so that, and do whatever. Your role is going to be maybe a little less hands-on engineering and a little bit more moving the tickets around and working with different people and sequencing things out or whatever, but it's just a different role. It's not, a hierarchical thing. And I think that that's an important part as well, is just sort of showing that, as you said, like down in the trenches, like I don't feel like I'm any more or less important than anyone else in the organization. We're all just as important. We're all here to solve the same problems. We all have our role to play on that. And I think that's an important part that goes a long way. As is, I think, Mike, you touched on it, which is the feedback. Like, look, if I'm giving feedback, I better be willing to accept feedback and act on feedback. I joked at one of the more recent podcast recordings that my pairing was like a hat and bad hair. It's because the feedback I got from my team was my hair was terrible. So put on a hat. But I mean, I'm just joking. But the fact of the matter is, like, establish those sort of personal rapport and like have that be able to have that conversation. And like, I think it goes a long way. Like, you don't always have to be talking about work. It's important to sort of establish a nice rapport where you can exchange ideas and talk.
I can definitely go into Slack right now and search for how many times in public channels I said I was wrong. Like, I have no problem
Right.
doing that. So if that shows the vulnerability aspect,
right.
I agree with you there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually had someone on my leadership team after we had a meeting where I said, oh yeah, that was on me. I should have done X. And she said, that was amazing that you did that you just admitted that in front of the whole group. And that just changes the way that everyone looks at how they relate to everyone else on the team. And and what they feel that they can talk about.
Yeah, I think it's important that people feel comfortable being able to make a mistake and then admit it. Right. Don't be afraid to fail. Like that's the failure is sweeping it under the rug or pretending like it didn't happen or not learning from it. I think is really the failure, not the mistake itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You actually brought up a point, Mike, just in the cyberspace of like, when somebody kind of got snagged on a phishing attack or something like that, like in a testing scenario, by bringing it to people's attention, you did the right thing. Like that was it versus like trying to pretend and hide it and like, oh no, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Because I've been on the other side of it where back when I was in cybersecurity operations, where we had logs that someone clicked on something they shouldn't have clicked on. And so we'll go to them and say, hey, look, you clicked on this. And so, we're going to need to do X and Y with your machine. And they're like, no, I didn't click on it. Oh. And I'm like, we have the logs that showed you.
What that actually implies it's even worse. It means somebody else was on your machine and did it. Which door do you really want to open now?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah, I think we could talk about leadership traits for a while. I want to be mindful of everyone's time and kind of wrap at this point. Anywhere specific that you'd want to point folks to find you on social? You feel free to rattle it off. We'll put it in the show notes as well. But I don't know if there's anything public you wanted to announce.
So I'm on LinkedIn and spend more time on it than I probably should. And our website for KeyCaliber is just keycaliber.com, KeyCaliber.com.
Good stuff. Mike, hands?
I'm also on LinkedIn, and I'm embarrassed to say that I pay for the premium. So if you go there, I'll probably see it, though I have no idea what to do with that information. LinkedIn, Michael Hands. And then our website at Picnic is getpicnic.com. It's beautiful. I'm always looking for feedback on it, but I could never create something as beautiful as it. So, yeah.
Good stuff. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I think it's a really interesting topic, and maybe we do have a follow-up at some point where we kind of compare the different styles of stealth mode. But this was a really interesting one, and thank you all for spending some time with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks so much.